Story 1. Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death. He walked down the rows of prisoners like a conductor before a silent orchestra. In his hand wasn't a whip or a gun, it was a pencil. With a flick of his wrist, the fate of hundreds was decided. Left straight to the gas chambers, right into his laboratory. His name was Josef Mengele, the man history remembers by two chilling words: the Angel of Death, the doctor who believed he was God. Josef Mengele was not insane. He was one of Nazi Germany's most educated doctors, trained in medicine and anthropology, and he truly believed he was serving the future of mankind. In his eyes, the concentration camps were not hell, but a perfect laboratory, a place where he had an endless supply of specimens for his studies on genetics, heredity, and the human body. His greatest obsession was with twins. Whenever a new train of prisoners arrived, Mengele would ask the same question: "Are there any twins here?" The twins were separated from the others, given better food, cleaner clothes, and medical attention, but not out of kindness. They were his living experiments. He compared them, injected them with chemicals, infected one, and observed the other, recording everything meticulously. It was no longer medicine. It was the art of controlling life and death. Witnesses said Mengele always appeared immaculate polished boots, white gloves, a faint smile as he entered his lab. When asked about his emotions, he once replied, "I don't torture them. I observe. Science demands truth, even when truth is painful." The man who played God. In one of his surviving notebooks, investigators found a line that still chills historians: "If there is a God, he must be a scientist." That single sentence revealed the size of his ego, a man who believed intellect stood above morality. When World War II ended and Auschwitz fell, Josef Mengele vanished. While his fellow officers were captured or executed, he fled to South America under a false identity. There, he lived for years as a quiet gentleman with a garden, polite neighbors, and a spotless medical record. No one suspected that this mild-mannered man was once the most infamous ghost of Europe. A neighbor later recalled, "He loved watching children play. He'd sit for hours, just staring, but his eyes didn't look like a father's." The final years. When Brazilian police searched his final residence decades later, they found hundreds of notes, anatomical sketches, and essays about genetic perfection. Even at the end of his life, Mengele insisted he had done nothing wrong. He once wrote, "I did not kill. I only studied what makes people die." It was a perfect mirror of the Hannibal Lecter archetype, a man who used intellect to rationalize horror and logic to hide his primal instincts. Josef Mengele never screamed, never raged. He simply observed, took notes, and washed his hands after every experiment. They called him the Angel of Death, but in truth, he was just a man who believed that science stood above morality. And that is the most terrifying silence of all. When a brilliant mind forgets how to fear, and a doctor convinces himself he is saving humanity by destroying what makes it human. Story 2. Shiro Ishii, the Ghost of Laboratory 731. When Japanese troops retreated from Manchuria, American soldiers entered an abandoned military base. On the wall hung a sign: Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, Unit 731. Inside, everything was wiped clean. No people, no bodies, only half-finished experiments left behind. Freezers filled with strange samples, glass jars labeled with coded symbols. It wasn't until years later that the world discovered this place had been the cruelest medical hell in human history. And at its center stood one man, General Shiro Ishii, the scientist who believed in sacrifice. Shiro Ishii wasn't a madman. He was a physician, a microbiologist hailed as one of Japan's brightest medical minds. He believed science was the ultimate weapon, and that to win a war, one had to understand the human body completely. He was tasked with creating a disease prevention unit for the army, but in reality, it was a laboratory built on living human beings. Under the guise of research, Ishii and his team conducted experiments with plague, chemical agents, and biological weapons on prisoners of war, soldiers, and civilians. There were no names, no rights, no humanity, only subjects and reaction data. In his reports, he referred to them as Maruta logs. Witnesses recalled Ishii always appearing in a spotless white coat, speaking softly, never raising his voice. He entered the lab like a teacher entering a classroom. Everyone called him Sensei, the professor. To him, it was all just another lesson on how far the human body could endure before breaking. A technician who once worked under him later said, he wasn't angry or sadistic, he was just cold. It was as if he had forgotten what right and wrong meant. Science without a soul. Ishii recorded everything meticulously. Every heartbeat, every infection, every death became data. His reports contained no mention of humans, only specimen A, specimen B, experiment no, 42. When asked by a colleague if he ever felt guilt, Ishii replied, "If hundreds die to save millions, that's a fair price to pay." A sentence that sounded rational but hid the logic of a man who believed he was killing in the name of progress. When the war ended, the United States discovered Unit 731's horrifying reports. But instead of sending Ishii to trial, they made a deal. Freedom in exchange for his research. Ishii agreed. He lived out his life peacefully in Tokyo with a garden, a clean medical record, and not a trace of remorse. Years later, a journalist asked one of Ishii's former officers, "Did he ever show emotion?" The man answered simply, "Yes. Whenever he talked about science, he smiled like a child who'd found a new toy." The shadow of knowledge. Shiro Ishii was the perfect embodiment of darkness within the light of intellect. A man who did not kill out of rage, but out of conviction, believing that death was a tool of understanding. He never saw himself as a criminal, only as a pioneer of military medicine. Shiro Ishii carried no gun. He never set foot on the battlefield. All he needed was a pen, a notebook, and people reduced to numbers. To him, blood was not sin, it was data. And perhaps the most terrifying thing of all was not what he did, but that he truly believed he was right. Story 3. Thomas Neill Cream, the Doctor of Poison. As the hangman pulled the lever, the noose tightened around the man's neck. Just before the trapdoor opened, he smiled and uttered his final words. "I am Jack the Ripper." The courtroom at Old Bailey fell into stunned silence. No one knew whether it was a true confession or the final flourish of a man who wanted to be remembered through fear. His name was Thomas Neill Cream, a doctor, a gentleman, and a murderer who killed with poison. The gentleman killer. Born into a prosperous British family, Cream studied medicine and graduated with honors. He had everything: education, prestige, and wealth. But what truly fascinated him was not money. It was the power to decide life and death. Cream was obsessed with poisons, the way an artist is drawn to paint. He studied each chemical meticulously, noting the exact dose needed to make someone sleep forever without pain. His victims were carefully chosen, mostly poor women, sex workers, or desperate patients seeking abortions. He would smile gently and hand them a small bottle, saying, "This will help you feel better, my dear." And within hours, they were dead silent, painless, gone. The narcissist's game. But what puzzled investigators most was how Cream seemed to want to be caught, just not too soon. After every killing, he sent anonymous letters to the police, describing crime details only the murderer could know. He signed them not with his name, but with a chilling line: "A doctor who cares about justice." The police were baffled. The letters helped and hindered them at the same time, painting a portrait of a man who wanted to be both the villain and the hero. The press dubbed him the polite phantom of London. For Cream, murder wasn't about hate, it was a test of intellect, a game to see whether he could outsmart the world and still become famous. Psychologists later labeled him a narcissistic genius, a man in love with his own mind. He killed not for vengeance or desire, but to prove, "I can do what no one else can, and get away with it." To him, death was not evil. It was a mathematical proof. The fall of the doctor. Witnesses later said Cream would sit for hours in cafes, reading newspaper articles about himself, smiling faintly whenever he saw phrases like "a brilliant physician misunderstood by society." When police finally tracked him down, a vial of poison hidden in his Lambeth apartment, Cream didn't resist. He stood, adjusted his collar, and said calmly, "I knew this day would come. I was only curious how long it would take." Inside his coat pocket, they found a small notebook, a list of women's names, followed by one haunting sentence: "Justice has many forms. I chose mine." At trial, Cream neither confessed nor denied. He answered questions like a lecturer explaining philosophy. When the judge asked if he felt remorse, Cream replied, "I regret only that the world is too small for a mind like mine." The courtroom fell silent. Newspapers called it the confession of a Victorian Hannibal, a man who saw murder as an art form. A perfect ending. On the morning of his execution, Cream appeared calm, almost pleased. He wrote his final note: "They think I am the devil. I am merely a man seeking to understand how the soul leaves the body." A line eerily similar to what Hannibal Lecter would one day say: "We fear evil because it looks too much like ourselves." Thomas Neill Cream, the doctor who turned death into logic, who used intellect to decorate sin, and who chose his own execution as the perfect final act. He never asked for forgiveness. He only wanted to be remembered. And in a way, he succeeded. 3 minds, 3 twisted reflections of reason and darkness, each believing they had a righteous cause. Sometimes, the thing we fear most isn't the monster in the shadows, but the one quietly breathing inside us. If within you lies an angel or a demon, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to uncover the next forbidden case file. This is Dark File, where the world's darkest stories are brought into the light.